Hey folks, I just wanted to showcase a new chainsaw display here at the Coland Transportation Museum and go through a little bit of history of some chainsaws. And of all our chainsaws, it all starts off with this big top one right here. That's a Disston-Mercury 2-man chainsaw. That thing weighs about 104 pounds. And it's got just I think about 11 horsepower motor on it. And as you can see, there are handles on both ends. It's meant for 2 people. And a lot of people ask, well, why did they start off so big? Well, number one is the engines weren't very powerful, so they were going to be heavy to begin with. But number two, in the industry, the lumber industry, a lot of lumberjacks were used to large 2-man cross-cut saws like you see right there. Well, when you're starting to develop a chainsaw, you tend to keep that same design. People were used to having 2 people, so you'd have one on the motor end, one on the bar end, and now you've got your saw. Now a big saw like this can be used in 2 directions. It can be used up and down if you're in the wood yard, cleaning up lumber, or you can actually turn the blade, turn it in this sort of orientation if you're going to fell trees. But there are a couple bolts that are on the motor end there that would allow you to turn that blade, and I'm going to get into the reasons why with our next saw. This is a 1946 Power Machinery Limited Universal model. And what's neat about this saw is it's the first one-man chainsaw that this company ever produced. Actually, it's the first chainsaw this company produced ever, and I've done a video on this on cleaning it up and such. But what's neat about this saw is it's a 2-position saw. It's up and down right now, but because of the way the carburetor is set up, just like in this saw up here, it has a float and a bowl, and that requires gravity to operate. So you can't just turn it on its side and expect it to cut. So in order to turn this saw over on its side to cut trees, you would actually undo a ring here, and you can actually turn the carburetor into the side position so the float and bowl would work. And to accommodate that, it's got a loose fuel line there, a flexible fuel line. And that's from around 1946. Now right beside it here, I've got a Titan 40. They approached the problem differently. What they did is, instead of turning the motor, just like the Disston-Mercury saw up here, they actually allow you to just turn the bar. So you can see the handle there, and there's a clip. You could actually turn that bar so it could be flat and used for cutting trees. But the saw that's in between these here is a Woodlot Wizard, and it's made by Lombard. And this fixed the problem in what most saws have today. It has a diaphragm style carburetor. It's an all-position carburetor, so now you don't have to worry about the orientation of the motor. Now what's neat about this saw, and I've seen sales literature, it actually had an open chain sprocket that you see like that. That's how the saw operated, so I imagine it would help keep the saw mechanisms clear. But because of its all-position carburetor, you could, much more easier to delimb trees and all, the things that you need to do with a chainsaw without having to stop and change the orientation. Now, the Titan and the Lombard right here use a centrifugal clutch. This Universal doesn't. It has a manual clutch, and so you'd actually spin the handle right there, and that would tighten up the clutch and allow the chain to turn. So you'd set the speed, and you'd actually operate the saw with the clutch, and the other ones here, you'd actually operate them via the throttle. The last 3 saws on the display are very unique saws, and that's why we have them here. This first one with the huge bar, this is a Terrell Saw, and what's neat about it is it was made right here in Bangor, Maine, just a small town in central Maine. But lumbering's a big industry in the state of Maine, and they actually manufacture these saws here. Now, they did outsource the engines. It's a West Bend motor, and the parts were, assembled here, and you could always bring your saw right into the plant. And I say a plant, it was, I think, some guy's very large garage behind his house. That's what actually the company was. But this was actually the last model of saw. They actually stopped producing these saws here in Maine around 1960. Next to it here, I have a 1973 Super Comanche. What's neat about this saw is it's the last Lombard design. Lombard was a chainsaw company started in Massachusetts, but eventually through acquisitions and such went to Canada and went to Ohio. And this is the last true Lombard design that I'm aware of. After that, it was just kind of a rebranded type of other saw. Now this last saw on our display is a very important saw. It's a McCulloch Powermac 6. And why it's important is because, or at least according to the McCulloch website, this is the first chainsaw to break the 8-pound barrier, which means if you fill it with gas and fill it with oil, it only weighs 8 pounds. Now you're considering that, in the 1940s we have a 102 or 104-pound saw right here. Having an 8-pound saw is a significant upgrade. And this is really where chainsaws started getting introduced for residential use, where people started to have all sorts of, everyone has a chainsaw, even a little one, to cut a little this or a little that, or even use them in construction. So here's our display of saws. There's a lot of information on the internet about these saws here, and I also would recommend the book Chainsaws: A History by David Lee and Mike Akers, who actually runs a really nice website, has a lot of history on all these saws that you see here. But this is just a kind of a quick presentation of chainsaw histories, and all of these saws, what binds them together is they were all used or either manufactured right here in the state of Maine.